You know, for someone who's been on this heroin for 7 years now, and his first 6 years was spent only doing nothing but traditional art, and who also spent 7 years studying animation history, it only makes sense for me to do a video like this. I'm Leonardo Morales Pitalua, animator, and founder of the studio Lanali Visual Arts. And what I'm going to do is show y'all who want to keep traditional animation alive how to make animation cells the proper way and the best way possible. Okay, yeah, I'm no Disney ink and paint artist and I don't have 20 years of experience inking, but I do have 5 years of experience inking and 7 years of knowledge gained from dozens of different sources. And I have made more than 1,000 cells. And I've also made videos of myself painting cells. And yes, have even made animation with them. So if there's anyone out there who's earned the right to do something like this, it would be me. Now the reason I'm doing it is simply because there's not a lot of videos on this. And a lot of the ones I found are not very good. Okay, yeah, I would be lying if I said I didn't go to those videos first, but I would later go and gather more information in other places. And I'm more surprised a lot of tutorials actually leave out a lot of crucial things about making cells. So now it is my goal to make the best animation cell tutorial, because I have nothing better to do. This will even blow Doig and Swift's Patreon article on making cells out of the water. Let's just get right into making cells. If you want to skip to a specific part, timestamps will be in the description. First things first, let's go over materials and everything that is required for making a cell. I will also provide sources for where you can find these. Links are in the description. Firstly, and this is required, it's not a recommendation, you need a light box. Either a personal, professional, or even just a light pad. You also need your peg bar, either Acme or round pegs. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is you also need a drawing. A drawing you made on paper. It is also hole punched to fit on your peg bar and is what you want to transfer onto the cell. It can either be something that you drew yourself or a frame you want to transfer onto a cell, like either a keyframe from a cartoon that you either want to make a counterfeit of, or just vision what a digitally made show would look like if it did use cells. Something that is actually optional is a background. Yeah, you can have the cell by itself, but if you wanted to make it like an actual completed piece, you could also make a background, in which this is just regular watercolor paper, hole punched and all, to fit on your peg bar. And of course, the most important thing you need to even make a cell, celluloid sheets. Now, we really only call them cells for nostalgic reasons, and also because, well, cells used to be made out of real celluloid, the same material used for film strips. However, that material has proven to be very flammable. So they changed it in 1936 to celluloid's acetate. And that's what we're going after here, acetate sheets. Now, unlike what many people say, it's actually very easy to come across cells. Now, yeah, of course you can find these things on Cartoon Supply, aka Lightfoot Ltd, or Chromacolor, and they sell them in 12 and 16 field sheets, punched and unpunched. But if you're like me and only use the widely and only available 10 field size, even though Lightfoot Ltd does sell 10 field cells, they are still pretty expensive. I don't buy them from there, as I actually found the cells I use on Amazon. These here. Now, they have for some reason rebranded, but they are still the same. And you can get these sheets in packs of 10 to 500 sheets. and they are less expensive than how they are in Lightfoot Ltd, and are in the regular 10 field size. Yeah, this is only for if you use 10 field and not 12 or 16 field, but a majority of beginners only use 10 field, so I'm catering this towards you guys. Now that you have the Cels, now for the next important thing. Ink. The kind of ink you need is Speedball Super Black Indian ink. Or any kind of Indian ink that can adhere to a cell. I've been using Speedball ink for a long time, so I say go for this. And to use the ink, you also need a calligraphy pen. No other pen will work other than a calligraphy pen. Well, you could also use a liner brush, but if you want the consistent line, go with the calligraphy pen. And I use this nib. I don't know what this is called, but it does give a very smooth, consistent line, and it doesn't easily run out or splotch all over the cell. That's my personal pick, but you could also use the G nib or experiment with all different other kind of nibs. Also, another thing you do need while you're inking, and this is always something that's left out by everyone who inks Cels, but it's something you see when you look at old footage of the ink and paint girls at work.
Notice the black stick in the inker's hand. It's called an ebony stick, and it's used to hold the cell steady so it can be worked on more easily.
That's what it's called. Another thing you need when you're inking Cels, just in case you ever make a mistake when you are inking.
Then she uses a felt stick to erase. The felt stick will take away any line without scratching the smooth surface of the cell.
Now, I don't know where to find this, so my substitute would be just a Q-tip, as it will have the same results. Or you could just use an eraser. But it does have the possibility of either smudging or scratching the cell. So it's more better to just take your time with this. Another thing you need when you're inking, and an obvious thing, are white cotton gloves, so you don't get any of your fingerprints or body oils on the cell. And now the last important thing you need when making Cels is obviously paint. And either pastels or cups to hold the paint in. The kind of paint you want is an acrylic water-based paint that will also adhere to the cell. Now, just like everyone else who painted Cels, I would have recommended cell vinyl paint by this great company called Cartoon Color, but they are long gone, and the paint is no longer being made and is no longer sold. They couldn't have even given away the recipe for the paint. And so far, the only cell vinyl paints that are still around and are available to buy are the Chroma Color paint and Toon Tones. Now, I haven't actually tried any of these paints, as I can't get them, but from what I heard, if you want a very vivid paint and also want to make animation with them, then go with Chroma Color. If you want a very rich paint and just want to make Cels and nothing more, then go with Toon Tones. But I don't have access to those paints, and I assume you watching don't either. So for the cheaper and more readily available option, I'd go for these cheap potted craft acrylic paints. They don't just do their job, they're actually really good. They adhere to the cell, and they're very fluent and are easy to use. Now, yeah, they're not as thick as cell vinyl paints, as you do need to put more blobs of paint on the cell, so it's opaque, and they all dry a bit differently, but I find these things work the best. Okay, now that we have everything we need, and you got the drawing you want to transfer to your cell ready, let's get started. So, you have your drawing that either you made, or it's a printout of a frame from a film or a show that you want to make into a cell, and you have it also hole punched in on your peg bar, on the light box, and you also have all your inks, paints, pastels, pens, brushes, water, paper towels, and gloves ready. It's better to have everything already set up beforehand. Importantly, you must put on your gloves, that way you for sure do not get any body oils and any smudging on the cell. I'll show you what happens if you don't in just a minute. Now that you have your gloves on, take the piece of celluloid, and if you haven't already, punch the cell so you can place it on the peg bar. The pegs will keep the drawing and the cell in registration. If you don't have a peg bar, line up the cell with the drawing and tape it down. However, only do that if you do not have a peg bar, as the pegs are enough to keep the cell in firm registration. Now, get your calligraphy pen and your ebony stick ready, and open up your ink. Dip the pen in and be sure to brush off any excess ink. And now, place the ebony stick somewhere close to where you're going to start inking first, holding down the cell, and start inking the first parts. I always start with the eyes, as they are the most round shapes. Then I work my way down to the feet, and all the other little details. When you're inking, you want to do every line in one stroke and not lift your pen, as, well, that might ruin the line. Now, inking like this is drastically different from inking on a computer. In any regular art program, you can easily undo a line. But here, you cannot. And really, you just can't afford to make any mistakes. And really, this is a luxury that the digital age doesn't even have. Needing to know exactly what you're doing. And since you're using a calligraphy pen, you obviously have to use it as it's supposed to. As in, the nib has to be pointing up when you're stroking down. You can also turn the light box constantly to get the drawing at the right angle so you can ink it easier. Now, it can be pretty hard to do this, as it does take practice to get the right kind of line. And, well, they say it takes 20 years to be a good inker, and you don't have the luxury of undoing something. You have the luxury of needing to know exactly what you're doing, and not just doing it. The main reason why you don't want to clean up your drawing with black ink is because, well, you're inking in black, and it can be a little hard to tell what is inked on the cell and what isn't. So that's why I always tie down my drawings with a darker pencil. But if you want to clean it up, do it in a color that's not black. Also, while you're inking, and this is why you need a peg bar, you should frequently lift up the cell just so you can see how the lines look by themselves. When you do make a mistake, don't worry, you got your felt stick, or Q-tip, or eraser. Just rub it out, making sure not to scratch the cell. Now, what if you didn't have gloves when you were inking, and got your body oils on the cell? This is what happens. I fucking hate this, as it makes inking the area way more frustrating, as it won't go on and it will just smudge. And even if you get it on, it doesn't dry nicely. Any lines need to be done in a color other than the black lines. I would recommend doing those first, as they won't bleed into the black lines. You should have also gotten that specific color ink as well, with the black ink. The ink does dry pretty fast, but I don't think it dries as fast as it would on a cell than regular paper. Once you have finished inking in all the lines, go on and lift up the cell off the drawing and see what you've done. And if you have a background, put it up against the background so you can see more clearly how it looks there. Just let the cell dry for the time being before we start on the painting. Now, what if you don't want to physically ink your cells by hand and you want to do the old Xerox method. Well, one thing you need to know is that you need to find the right kind of celluloid that can go into an inkjet or laser printer, and that the ink won't wipe off. Now, all the exact things you need for the Xerox method process that was used in the old days isn't available to the masses, and it requires a more massive setup, so you're just gonna have to deal with a regular printer. Now, you need to have all your drawings ready and scanned in as well. And it also needs to be cleaned up with solid black lines, so it can print out the lines in black, or if you want it in a different color. Put it into any program that can make the lines white, background transparent, leaving only the lines solid, so that when you print it out, it only has the ink lines. Do this with every frame that you want inked, and also check to see if it printed out correctly, and that the printer ink doesn't wipe off and is fused to the cell. Okay, now that you have all the inks done and they're all dry now, remove all other paper and pages off your peg bar and light box, leaving just the cell by itself on the light box. And hey, guess what? You do not need to wear your gloves anymore, as the part where you needed them is done. Though if you really do not want fingerprints or smudging on the cell, then you can keep them on. Now, flip the cell over to its backside. We have to paint the cell on the back. It's a good thing you had all your paints with all the appropriate colors required for the cell and all the palettes and the cup of water and paper towel ready in advance. If you need to mix any of your paints to get to a specific color, you need to make sure that you mix enough so you don't run out of paint. With all the paints ready, your brush is prepared, turn on the light box, and start painting. I usually start painting in all the white parts first, then the black parts, then work my way down from the most used color to the least used. The place I usually start painting is the eyes. When you're painting a cell, it's a very different technique, as you're not doing brushing strokes or fine detail. The paint is applied by a floating process called puddling. You want to puddle the paint on the cell. Grab as much paint as the brush can hold and blob it on the cell and spread it out as much as you can, making sure you stay within the lines, and you fill in all the areas with opaque paint. This is why we need the light box, as this is used so we can easily see the opacity of the paint, and where any holes are and spots that aren't opaque. Now you would want a light box that is a lot less brighter than the one I have, as they will do the job as well, but god damn it, this light is so fucking bright. So if you have one that's like this bright, I would advise wearing sunglasses. Also, just like when you're inking, I would advise to flip the cell over so you can see how the paint looks from the front, and not only look at how the paint is on the back. Just keep doing this until all the areas are filled with opaque paint. Once you've finished painting, go ahead and look at it from the front. No, you idiot! Don't place it down on the paint side, it's still wet! Let it dry for a few hours. Once it's completely dry, now you can place it down on the paint side. And there you go. You now have a finished cell. If you want to do special effects, there are many ways you can do it. Now, I haven't actually tried out any special effects, but from what I've seen, you can do several airbrush or dry brush effects. But it's definitely a more complicated process that you're gonna want to figure that out on your own.
Animation at the time the majority of it was a handmade art. There were 24 drawings per second, and each of those had to be transferred to Cels, celluloid acetate. They had to be inked on the front, painted on the back, but On top of that, then they had specialists come in with airbrushes to soften the color. Then they had other people who would do dry brush. They would take a bit of color and wipe that off on a cloth and then start to put it on so you get a sort of texture on it. Incredible stuff. For each frame of those sequences, it took an enormous amount of hand labor.
Now, if you only wanted to make a cell, you can just stop here. What about that background you also made for it? Well, it's not going to paint itself, so get to painting that background. Now, there's really nothing special about painting a background for a cell, or for animation in general. It's just making a regular watercolor, gouache, oil, or acrylic painting. You are painting this on watercolor paper, and it is on your peg bar, punched and all. While you're painting your background, you should also hold up the cell in front of it, not laid on top of the background, so you can see how the background looks in stark contrast to the background. Once you have finished that background and it is completely dry, now you can place the cell on top of that. And voila! You now have a completed cell with the background and all. Now, what do you do with it? Well, you can either throw it in the pile, or you can frame that shit. Or if you were making animation with it, get it ready for the camera department. You have your rostrum, you have the lights ready, and are well adjusted to light the image. You got your camera ready, set to manual, and is set to the correct settings, and you're either using actual film, or you have that camera hooked up to a computer running stop motion software, and below the camera there should be the peg bar, and that peg bar has to be a metal one, properly centered, with a glass plate on top of it as well, so you can flatten the cells when you're photographing them. You have the huge stack of celluloids next to you, with also all the backgrounds, and the timing charts and exposure sheets as well. If you know how to photograph a black background, then photographing cells should be pretty easy for you, and not look like complete shit. Have your cells ready, and the background on top of the peg bar, as that always goes down first. Then following the exposure sheet, place down the corresponding cell on top of the background. And while you're at it, also be sure to dust off anything that may have crept in on the cell. Otherwise you're going to see dust on the cell. Lower the glass plate so that it flattens the cell. And when you make sure that everything is accounted for and is ready, take a picture. Once you have that exposure done, lift up the glass plate, remove the cell, and replace it with the next corresponding cell. Then place the glass plate back on the cell, and photograph that. Lather, rinse, repeat. Do this for every frame following the exposure sheet. When it's finished, go ahead and take a look at how it turned out. And there you have it. I did what I set out what I was going to do. Hope you found this video helpful. I do hope I actually encourage you to try making one on your own. Links to all the supplies I use are in the description. See ya!